just a quick review of the book, Strength Training for Seniors. Increase your balance, stability, and stamina to rewind the aging process, which I totally agree with. As you get older, there's a lot of changes that take place in your body, and some you can reverse to a certain extent, and a lot of them you can't. But definitely as your muscles get smaller, like decade by decade, as you get older, you're going to lose a certain percentage of muscle bulk unless you do things like strength training. This is something that you can get back to a large extent. To kind of reverse the aging process. So I agree with that. Basically, the book's divided up into 14 chapters, and I'm going to go over each real briefly just to give you an idea what's in the book. The first one is the basics of resistance training. Here they go over the exercises, rest and recovery. 2 is why you should lift weights. It goes over all the benefits of strength training. 3 is getting and staying motivated to exercise, which I thought was good because a lot of times you're all gung-ho when you get a book like this, and then after a couple of weeks you're like, I'm kind of over this. Well, that's a good chapter to read for sure. Don't skip it. 4 is what you need to know to get started. Talk about things like clothes, muscle soreness you might get, equipment. 5 is exercise guidelines for seniors. 6 is how the program works. 7 is let's get started. They go into like warm up and flexibility. Then 8, total body strength, weeks 1 and 2. Chapter 9 is total body strength, weeks 3 and 4. And the 10th chapter is total body strength, weeks 5 and 6. So it's kind of broken up, in 2-week blocks. Chapter 11, then it goes into split strength training, weeks 7 and 8. Then split strength training, weeks 9 and 10 is chapter 12. And 13 ends with split strength training, weeks 11 and 12. And then the book goes, 14 is what happens next. They talk about manipulating the principles of strength training, things like overload, specificity, those kind of things. So yeah, I think if you want to get, you're getting up there in years, like me, and you want to start getting into, strength training, maybe stand up from a chair is getting a little bit harder. Definitely that's something you can totally get over with strengthening muscles, like your quads, get your legs strengthened up. This is a really good resource. And I'm glad to see a lot of books coming out now for seniors. There never used to be that many good books for seniors. One other one I'm going to bring up, this is if you get exercising, you do strength training like overhead exercises, and you start having shoulder problem, this is a good book. Or if you have a torn rotator cuff, as you get older, every decade by decade, there's an increased incidence of torn rotator cuff in seniors. So if any of that prevents you from exercising, this is a good resource, the 6-minute torn rotator cuff solution. Or if you want to prevent a shoulder problem, I think strengthening your rotator cuff is a great idea. Basically, your shoulder is a shallow ball and socket joint, and it depends heavily on the rotator cuff for stability. So you'd be surprised if you strengthen your rotator cuff, a lot of other shoulder issues actually go away. That's because there's no excessive motion irritating things. So things like bursitis, tendonitis tend to get better. Anyway, the book starts out briefly, what is the rotator cuff? Lots of pictures. If you're a visual learner, you really like it. Part 2, answers you need to know. So if you tore your rotator cuff, what are the symptoms of a tear? Are there any arm maneuvers that might indicate you have a tear? Are there any imaging tests that are used to diagnose a rotator cuff tear? Where is the tear at? Lots of those kind of questions. Are there different kinds of rotator cuff tears? Here's a good one. I have a rotator cuff tear and I'm in a lot of pain. I need surgery, right? Well, not really. So this book is really evidence-based, just based totally on published studies. Well, basically, they went through all the studies where they take a group of people with rotator cuff tears and they measure how big is the tear and, how bad are you hurting? Like 0 to 10, how bad are you hurting? And then they look at the correlations between how big of the tear size is and how bad you're hurting. And come to find out, there's actually people walking around that have big rotator cuff tears that actually have no pain. Likewise, there's people with tiny tears that actually are in a lot of pain. So just because you're having a lot of pain doesn't necessarily mean, I got to have surgery. What happens if I leave the rotator cuff tear alone? Well, here again, evidence-based medicine. And what you're going to know is if you look at studies where they take people that have a rotator cuff tear that never get treatment and they follow them for 5 or 10 years. What happens to them? Do they get better? Do they get the same or worse? Here's the best one. How does exercise compare to surgery when it comes to treating my torn rotator cuff? Well, evidence-based medicine, you look at the randomized controlled trials. Here again, this book has looked at all of them. That'd be where you say take 100 people with a torn rotator cuff. 50 you say, okay, you're going to have surgery. The other 50 you randomly assign to exercise, and you see where they're at, 6 months, a year, 2 years. And it's this book quite consistent finding in the literature, in the randomized controlled trials. Whether you have surgery or whether you do a good exercise program, you're going to end up at the same place. So that's a very consistent finding. So there you go. Anyway, to that end, the book has an exercise program. It does have 3 different levels: beginning, an intermediate, and advanced, which I really like. Some people have a big tear and they can't really do much, so it has really low-level exercises. Other times, you might have a small tear. Oh, it's kind of nagging. I can still do a lot. You can start with the intermediate or advanced. But anyway, good resource for seniors. I love these senior books. This one's a great one, Strength Training for Seniors. Very complete. So yeah, if you're interested in strength training, which I think you should be, definitely check it out.